Every system has limits. Push past them, and the rules change. We've modeled normal dynamics, conflict, norms, legislation, executive action, production. But what happens when normal isn't enough? When pressure exceeds what the system can process? When conditions become intolerable? Resistance and rebellion. The failure modes, the boundaries beyond which the old order ends. Today we examine the edge of the model. What triggers catastrophic change? What determines who wins? And what comes after? Rebellion becomes possible when conflict exceeds a threshold. Below the threshold, conflict expresses through normal channels: protests, strikes, elections, lobbying. The system absorbs pressure and adjusts. Above the threshold, normal channels seem inadequate. People conclude that the system cannot be reformed, only replaced. Collective action shifts from working within to working against. The threshold isn't fixed. It depends on norm strength. Strong norms raise the threshold because rebellion itself violates norms. Executive power. Effective repression raises the threshold by increasing costs. Economic conditions. Subsistence crisis lowers the threshold because people have nothing to lose. We can model this as rebellion. Probability. F, C. Threshold. N, E, P. When C exceeds the threshold, rebellion becomes increasingly likely. The further above, the more likely. Below the threshold, rebellion probability is near zero. The rich resist redistribution. The elite resist revolution. Resistance uses resources to oppose change. Lobbying against legislation, repression against rebellion, propaganda against mobilization. Resistance effectiveness depends on resource advantage. The rich have wealth to spend. The elite control institutions. These advantages translate into resistance capacity. But resistance is costly. Spent resources don't regenerate automatically. Sustained resistance drains wealth. Heavy repression strains executive power. Propaganda that contradicts reality loses effectiveness. The model captures resistance as a flow that counters pressure. Legislative pressure faces wealthy resistance. Rebellion faces executive resistance. Each uses stocks and depletes them. The question becomes, who runs out first? If resistance outlasts pressure, the status quo holds. If pressure outlasts resistance, change occurs. Revolution is a phase transition. The old equilibrium collapses, a new one emerges. During revolution, normal dynamics are suspended. The equations that governed the old order no longer apply. New equations, new parameters, new equilibria take over. What determines revolutionary outcomes? Relative mobilization. Which side can put more people in the streets, more soldiers in the field? Resource reserves. Which side can sustain conflict longer? Coordination. Which side can act cohesively while the other fragments? Legitimacy. Which side do neutral parties support? External intervention. Do outside powers tip the balance? The model can't predict these factors precisely, but it can identify when revolution becomes likely and what variables are decisive. What happens after revolution? Often, less changes than expected. Revolutionary regimes face the same structural constraints as their predecessors. They must generate production, manage conflict, maintain norms, exercise executive power. The new regime starts with different initial conditions. Different W if land reform or expropriation occurred. Higher N if the revolution had broad legitimacy. Higher E for the new executive, at least initially. Potentially lower P if conflict destroyed capacity. But the dynamics are similar. The same feedback loops operate. Wealth tends to reconcentrate. Conflict re-emerges around new distributions. Norms evolve. Executive power depletes. This is why revolutions often disappoint. They reset initial conditions, but don't escape the underlying dynamics. Without changing the structure, you get similar patterns eventually. When does reform work? When is revolution necessary? Reform works when the system has sufficient gamma to respond to pressure. Executive power doesn't block needed changes. The threshold isn't exceeded before adjustment occurs. Revolution becomes likely when gamma is too low, the system can't respond. Executive power blocks all reform. The threshold is exceeded and collective action shifts. There's a cruel irony here. Systems most in need of reform are often least capable of it. Low gamma and captured executives prevent response, pressure builds, the threshold is crossed. Systems that can reform don't need revolution. Systems that need revolution can't reform. The middle path, where timely reform prevents revolution, requires institutional capacity that struggling systems often lack. We've assumed a closed system, but reality includes external factors. Foreign powers can intervene militarily, changing the balance of force, provide resources to either side, impose constraints through sanctions or treaties, offer exit options through emigration or asylum. These external factors can prevent rebellion by raising costs, or enable rebellion by providing support, or determine outcomes that internal dynamics alone wouldn't produce. The model can incorporate external factors as parameters or shocks, but it's important to recognize they're there. Pure internal dynamics rarely determine outcomes in a connected world. Machiavelli understood this. He watched Italian city-states fall to French and Spanish armies. Internal dynamics mattered, but external intervention was often decisive. Let's summarize Module 3. We examined 5 sectors in detail. Scope, what the model includes and excludes. Closed system, 2 classes, macro-level dynamics. Class conflict and social norms. The C and N variables, their interaction, and tipping dynamics. The legislative sector, how pressure becomes policy, the role of gamma and delays, oscillation potential. The role of the executive, E as forcing function, cost of forcing, virtuous and vicious cycles. Economic considerations, production capacity, P, growth distribution trade-offs, economic shocks, resistance and rebellion, thresholds, phase transitions, post-revolutionary dynamics. You now understand the model's components in mathematical detail. Module 4 will show what happens when we simulate it. What patterns emerge? What do the findings tell us? Here's your challenge. For your chosen political economy, assess the rebellion dynamics. How close is conflict to the threshold? What's keeping it below? What's the resistance capacity? Can elite resistance outlast popular pressure? If rebellion occurred, who would likely win? What factors would be decisive? What would the post-revolutionary situation look like? Would structural change occur or just reset of initial conditions? Module 4 begins next. The findings. What happens when we run the model? What does it predict? What does it explain? See you there.